Institutional Equity Research Report, NYSE, BWXT, BWX Technologies Inc., America's sole naval reactor maker rides the commercial nuclear wave.
Executive Summary. BWXT Technologies is a Lynchburg, Virginia-based nuclear technology, manufacturing, and services company whose roots trace back to Babcock and Wilcox, founded in 1867. The modern standalone BWXT has existed since July 2015, when it was spun off from what became Babcock and Wilcox Enterprises. Today, BWXT occupies a genuinely unique position in American industry. It is the sole manufacturer of nuclear reactors for the U.S. Navy's submarine and aircraft carrier fleets, and one of only a handful of companies in North America capable of manufacturing large, precision nuclear components at all. In plain terms, when the U.S. Navy builds a Virginia-class or Columbia-class submarine or a Ford-class aircraft carrier, BWXT is the company that makes the nuclear reactor powering it, a position with essentially no domestic competition, extremely high barriers to entry, and multi-decade program visibility. Alongside this defense-anchored core, its government operations segment, roughly two-thirds of revenue, BWXT has been building a fast-growing commercial operations segment, supplying components and services to the broader civilian nuclear power industry, including the emerging small modular reactor supply chain. That commercial growth engine was on full display in Q2 2026 results, reported the same day as this report. Total revenue of $901.6 million, up 18% year-over-year, with commercial operations revenue surging to 72.5% to $302.5 million. Management raised full-year 2026 guidance across every key metric: revenue, adjusted EBITDA, earnings per share, and free cash flow, and total backlog grew to $8.4 billion, up from $6 billion a year earlier. Shares nonetheless slipped modestly in after-hours trading following the print, as revenue came in just below the top end of analyst expectations, even as earnings beat consensus. Key facts at a glance. Core business: sole manufacturer of U.S. Navy nuclear reactors, manufacturer of nuclear components and fuel for government and commercial customers. Segments: government operations, approximately 67% of revenue, naval propulsion anchored; commercial operations, approximately 33%, fast-growing, includes SMR supply chain. Q2 2026 revenue, $901.6 million, plus 18% year-over-year. Q2 2026 net income, $89.1 million, plus 14% year-over-year. Non-GAAP EPS, $1.07, beat $1.05 consensus. FY 2026 revenue guidance, $3.80 billion, raised from $3.75 billion. Total backlog, $8.4 billion, up from $6 billion a year earlier. Recent strategic move: closed acquisition of Precision Components Group, July 1, 2026. Announced sale of medical isotope business to sharpen focus on nuclear security and power. This report is intended to give both professional and retail investors a clear-eyed, plain English view of BWXT's business, its most recent quarterly results, and the key risks and catalysts likely to matter over the next 12 to 24 months. It is not a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold BWXT shares. Section 2. Investment Thesis. The bull case for BWXT rests on a rare combination: a risk and limitedly growing anchored core defense business, while considering the damages from failures and intense competition. The genuinely fast-growing commercial nuclear business is expected to boost the profits in the future. As the industry shifts towards small modular reactors, BWXT secured a foundational role in the supply chain of the GE Vernova BWRX 300 SMR design. The Cambridge, Ontario facility expansion, adding 50% more large component manufacturing capacity by mid-2026, directly targets what management describes as remarkably deep and broad demand for new nuclear solutions. An $8.4 billion backlog, up 40% year-over-year, provides substantial multi-year revenue visibility. The bear case centers on execution and valuation. BWXT's business is inherently project-based and concentrated. At any given time, a relatively small number of projects can represent a significant part of our operations, per the company's own historical disclosure, meaning schedule slips, cost overruns, or program cancellations on major naval or commercial contracts could disproportionately affect results. The government operations segment, still roughly 2/3 of revenue, grew only 2% year-over-year in Q2 2026, a reminder that the defense core is a steady, not fast-growing base, and that the bull case depends heavily on the smaller commercial segment continuing to scale at a high rate. Shares fell in after-hours trading immediately following the Q2 2026 beat and raise print, suggesting the market's expectations bar for BWXT has become genuinely high after a period of strong stock performance. Thesis in one sentence: BWX Technologies combines irreplaceable, high-visibility defense nuclear franchise with a genuinely accelerating commercial nuclear growth business, but investors are paying for continued flawless execution across a portfolio of large, concentrated, fixed-schedule projects where things can and do go wrong. Section 3. Company Overview. Legal Entity. BWXT Technologies, Inc. Headquarters: Lynchburg, Virginia. Exchange/ticker: NYSE/BWXT, S&P 400 component. Corporate roots: founded 1867 as Babcock & Wilcox by Stephen Wilcox and George Herman Babcock. Modern standalone entity since July 1, 2015, spin-off from Babcock & Wilcox Enterprises, Inc. President and CEO, Rex D. Geveden. Segments: Government Operations, Commercial Operations. Employees: approximately 7,800 as of FY 2023, more recent figure not verified in sources reviewed. Corporate history: BWXT's roots trace to Babcock & Wilcox, founded 1867. The nuclear-focused business that became today's BWXT emerged over decades of consolidation, most notably beginning with naval nuclear propulsion work supporting Admiral Hyman Rickover's development of the nuclear navy. On July 1, 2015, BWXT Technologies completed its spin-off from the legacy Babcock & Wilcox Company, which retained the power generation business under the name Babcock & Wilcox Enterprises, Inc., becoming an independent, publicly traded pure-play nuclear company listed on the NYSE. Corporate milestones. Date: milestone 1867. Babcock & Wilcox founded by Stephen Wilcox and George Herman Babcock. 1950s through present. Becomes the only North American company to continuously manufacture nuclear steam generators for the commercial nuclear power industry since the decade. July 1, 2015, BWXT Technologies completed its spin-off from Babcock & Wilcox, becoming an independent, publicly traded pure-play nuclear company listed on the NYSE. 2025 ends the year with a backlog of $7.3 billion, up 50% year-over-year, aided by 2 acquisitions and surging naval propulsion and uranium processing demand. 2026, announced, GE Vernova names BWXT its first qualified supply chain company for the GE Hitachi BWRX 300 small modular reactor design. Mid-2026,
Cambridge, Ontario facility expansion completes, adding 50% more large nuclear component manufacturing capacity. July 1, 2026, closes acquisition of Precision Components Group, PCG, establishing a U.S. footprint for commercial nuclear component manufacturing. 2026, announces planned sale of its medical radioisotope business to sharpen focus on nuclear national security and commercial nuclear power. August 3, 2026, reports Q2 2026 and raises full-year guidance across revenue, EBITDA, EPS, and free cash flow.
Section 4. Business Model. BWXT operates through two reportable segments. Government operations, roughly 2/3 of total revenue, centers on designing, engineering, and manufacturing precision naval nuclear components, complete reactors, and nuclear fuel exclusively for the U.S. government, principally the Navy's Virginia-class and Columbia-class and aircraft carrier Ford-class programs. This segment also includes defense fuels enrichment, HPDU production, environmental site restoration services, and early-stage work on space nuclear propulsion and fission surface power systems, supporting future Mars exploration efforts. Because BWXT is the sole qualified domestic manufacturer for naval nuclear reactors, this business carries essentially no direct competition, multi-decade program life cycles, and highly predictable government-backed revenue visibility. Commercial operations, roughly 1/3 of revenue, but growing far faster, 72% year-over-year in Q2 2026, supplies components, fuel cycle services, and engineering support to civilian nuclear utilities and the emerging small modular reactor industry, alongside historically including medical radioisotope production, now being divested per Section 03. This segment benefits directly from the broader global resurgence in nuclear power investment as utilities extend the life of existing reactors and a new generation of SMR developers seek qualified manufacturing partners for components too specialized or capital-intensive to produce in-house. How to think about it? Think of BWXT as running two very different businesses under one roof, a slow-growing, extremely stable, monopoly-like defense franchise that funds the company's core operations and dividend, layered with a smaller but rapidly scaling commercial nuclear supply chain business that represents the company's actual growth story for investors today. Section 5. Products and Services. Product/service. Description. Naval nuclear reactors. Complete nuclear reactor systems for U.S. Navy submarines and aircraft carriers. BWXT has manufactured more than 420 nuclear reactors for Navy submarines historically and remains the sole domestic qualified supplier. Nuclear fuel and defense enrichment. Nuclear fuel production and defense fuels enrichment services for U.S. government programs, including high-purity depleted uranium, HPDU. Heavy nuclear components. Large, precision-manufactured components such as steam generators and nuclear vessels for both government and commercial nuclear customers. BWXT is described as controlling the only large reactor manufacturing facility in North America. SMR supply chain components. Qualified manufacturing partner for small modular reactor designs, including GE Hitachi Nuclear Energy's BWRX 300 reactor design, positioning BWXT to benefit as SMR projects move from planning toward firm orders. Environmental and site services. Technical, management, and site services supporting governments in operating complex nuclear facilities and environmental remediation. Advanced and space nuclear programs. Early-stage development of space nuclear propulsion and fission surface power systems in support of U.S. efforts towards human Mars exploration.
BWXT's SMR positioning was reinforced when GE Vernova named the company its first qualified supply chain partner for the BWRX 300 reactor design, developed by GE Hitachi Nuclear Energy. The Tennessee Valley Authority, an investor in the BWRX 300 program, plans to site one such reactor at its Clinch River site in Tennessee. And CEO Rex Geveden has indicated the company expects to receive firm orders in the coming months, with additional demand potentially following from TVA and international customers. How to think about it? The distinction between backlog and firm orders matters here. Much of BWXT's SMR-related growth story today is still about positioning and qualification, being the approved supplier of choice, rather than fully contracted firm production revenue. The transition from one to the other over the next few years is a key thing to watch.
Section 6. Industry Overview. The global nuclear power industry is experiencing a broad-based resurgence after more than a decade of headwinds following the 2011 Fukushima disaster, which caused many governments to throttle or pause nuclear projects. Rising electricity demand from AI data centers, industrial electrification, and climate policy support have combined to renew utility and government interest in both large conventional reactors and the emerging class of small modular reactors, which promise lower upfront capital costs and faster construction timelines than traditional large-scale nuclear plants. On the defense side, the U.S. Navy's nuclear submarine and aircraft carrier construction programs continue at a steady, multi-decade cadence, providing BWXT's government operations segment with a highly predictable demand base, largely insulated from the broader nuclear industry's historical boom and bust cycles. Independent industry analysis has specifically highlighted BWXT's control of the only large reactor manufacturing facility in North America as a structural advantage as both defense and commercial nuclear demand accelerate simultaneously. Section 07. Market Opportunity. BWXT's most immediate growth opportunity is converting its expanding SMR-related positioning, qualification agreements, engineering support contracts, and early design work into firm, large-scale production orders as small modular reactor projects like the TVA-backed BWRX 300 at Clinch River move from planning into construction. Management's Cambridge, Ontario facility expansion, adding 50% more large nuclear component capacity by mid-2026, is a direct bet on this demand materializing at scale, and CEO Geveden has described the company as trying to get ahead of demand we know is precipitating in this market for both SMRs and CANDU reactors. Longer term, independent analysis has pointed to potential AUKUS-related industrial opportunities, the trilateral Australia-UK-US submarine and defense technology partnership, as a further avenue for naval nuclear demand, though work share and timing remain uncertain and heavily dependent on future policy decisions. The broader global SMR pipeline has been estimated at roughly 22 gigawatts by industry researchers, with the United States currently leading global development activity, a market BWXT is positioned to serve as a critical component supplier regardless of which specific SMR technology or developer ultimately wins the largest share of new construction. How to think about the opportunity? BWXT's SMR opportunity is somewhat different from betting on the single SMR developer's stock, because BWXT supplies components across multiple reactor designs and developers rather than owning a single proprietary technology. It can benefit from the broader industry's growth, even if any individual SMR company's specific design doesn't end up being the eventual market leader.
Section 8. Competitive Landscape. Competitive Factor. BWXT's position. Naval nuclear reactors. Sole qualified domestic manufacturer, no direct competitor in this specific market, reflecting decades of specialized qualification, security clearance, and government relationship requirements. Large nuclear component manufacturing, controls the only large reactor manufacturing facility in North America per independent analysis, giving it a structural advantage as both government and commercial demand accelerate. Commercial nuclear steam generators, the only North American company to continuously manufacture nuclear steam generators for commercial nuclear power since the 1950s. SMR component supply, named first qualified supply chain partner for GE Hitachi's BWRX 300 design, competes for similar roles across other SMR developers' supply chains rather than owning a single proprietary reactor design itself. Information not publicly available in the sources reviewed for this report, reflecting the highly specialized and consolidated nature of this industry segment. Section 9. Management Team. Rex D. Geveden, President and Chief Executive Officer. Joined BWXT as Chief Operating Officer in October 2015, shortly after the company's spin-off, before later being named President and CEO. On the Q2 2026 earnings call, Geveden characterized results as strong second quarter 2026 results that were ahead of our expectations, citing strong execution across our business, high growth in commercial operations, and good free cash flow generation, and described demand for new nuclear solutions as remarkably deep and broad, complementing our strong and growing base of highly predictable revenue streams in our government and commercial segments. Geveden has also spoken publicly about the company's origins in naval nuclear propulsion, supporting Admiral Rickover in the Naval Navy, and has framed the company's strategy around getting ahead of demand we know is precipitating in the SMR and CANDU reactor markets.
Section 10. Financial Performance. Metric. Q1 2026. Q2 2026. Revenue. $860.2 million plus 26.1% year-over-year. $901.6 million plus 18% year-over-year. Government operations revenue. Information not specified in this source set. $501.3 million plus 2% year-over-year. Commercial operations revenue. Information not specified in this source set. $302.5 million plus 72% year-over-year. Net income. Information not specified in this source set. $89.1 million plus 14% year-over-year. Non-GAAP diluted EPS. Information not specified in this source set. $1.07 versus $1.02 year-over-year, beat $1.05 consensus. Adjusted EBITDA. Information not specified in this source set. $155.5 million plus 7% year-over-year. In plain terms, BWXT delivered another quarter of double-digit revenue growth and continued earnings beats, extending a track record that included a 21.7% earnings surprise in the prior reported quarter. The clear story within the numbers is segment divergence. Government operations, the larger but slower-growing segment, increased just 2% year-over-year, while commercial operations, still the smaller segment, surged 72%, meaning nearly all of the quarter's incremental growth came from the commercial nuclear business, reinforcing that this is where investors should focus when assessing BWXT's forward growth trajectory. Backlog and capital returns. Total backlog reached $8.4 billion as of Q2 2026, up from $6.0 billion a year earlier, a roughly 40% increase that provides substantial multi-year revenue visibility across both segments. BWXT also continued its consistent capital return program, paying $24.7 million or 0.27 cents per common share in dividends during the quarter, with the board declaring a further 0.27 cents per share quarterly dividend payable September 4, 2026.
Section 11. Detailed analysis, latest quarterly earnings, Q2 2026. Revenue. Total revenue was $901.6 million, up 18% year-over-year, coming in slightly below the $905.4 million analyst consensus, a modest miss even as the underlying segment mix showed clear commercial acceleration. Government operations revenue grew 2% to $601.3 million, while commercial operations revenue jumped 72% to $302.5 million. Gross margin. Segment-level or consolidated gross margin detail, information not publicly available as a standalone reconciled figure in the specific sources reviewed for this report. Readers should consult the complete Form 10-Q on SEC EDGAR for full gross margin detail by segment. Operating income. Adjusted EBITDA was $155.5 million, up 7% year-over-year, reflecting the combined effect of steady government operations profitability and rapidly scaling commercial operations volume. Net income. GAAP net income was $89.1 million, up 14% year-over-year, continuing a consistent multi-quarter trend of double-digit earnings growth. EPS. GAAP diluted EPS was 97 cents. Non-GAAP diluted EPS was $1.07, up from $1.02 a year earlier and ahead of the $1.05 analyst consensus per investing.com and the $1.04 FactSet consensus cited by Market Screener, a modest but consistent beat. Cash flow. Specific standalone Q2 2026 operating and free cash flow figures, information not publicly available in a distinct reconciled line item in the sources reviewed for this report, beyond the full-year free cash flow guidance discussed below. Readers should consult the complete Form 10-Q for detailed cash flow statement figures. Balance sheet. Detailed standalone balance sheet figures, total assets, debt, cash position as of June 30, 2026. Information not publicly available in the specific sources reviewed for this report. Readers should consult the complete Form 10-Q on SEC EDGAR for full balance sheet detail. Guidance. Management raised full-year 2026 guidance across every key metric. Revenue guidance rose to approximately $3.80 billion from a prior greater than $3.75 billion, representing high teens year-over-year growth with mid-teens organic growth. Adjusted EBITDA guidance increased to $662 to $672 million, from $650 to $665 million. Non-GAAP EPS guidance rose to $4.70 to $4.80, from $4.60 to $4.75. Free cash flow guidance was raised to $345 to $360 million. Management commentary. CEO Rex D. Gavetin stated, "We had strong second quarter 2026 results that were ahead of our expectations. Once again, we saw strong execution across our business, high growth in commercial operations, and good free cash flow generation." He added that demand for new nuclear solutions is remarkably deep and broad, complementing our strong and growing base of highly predictable revenue streams in our government and commercial segments. On the medical business divestiture, management stated the move is in line with our strategy to bolster BWXT's competitive positioning in the nuclear national security and commercial nuclear power markets, enabling the company to increase focus and resources in these core business lines. Key changes versus previous quarter. Revenue growth decelerated slightly from 26.1% year-over-year in Q1 2026 to 18% in Q2 2026, though this remained a modest miss versus the specific quarterly consensus estimate. Commercial operations growth, 72% year-over-year, significantly outpaced government operations growth, 2%, reinforcing the segment divergence story central to the current investment thesis. Full-year 2026 guidance was raised across all four key metrics: revenue, adjusted EBITDA, EPS, and free cash flow for at least the second time in 2026. Total backlog grew to $8.4 billion from $6 billion a year earlier, an acceleration from the $7.3 billion, 50% year-over-year backlog already reported at the end of 2025. The company closed its acquisition of Precision Components Group on July 1, 2026, adding a U.S. footprint for commercial nuclear component manufacturing. Shares fell in after-hours trading despite the earnings beat, reflecting the modest revenue miss against elevated market expectations. Section 12. Growth Drivers. Small Modular Reactors Supply Chain Positioning. BWXT's role as GE Vernova's first qualified supply chain partner for the BWRX 300 SMR design, combined with anticipated firm SMR orders in the coming months and additional demand from the Tennessee Valley Authority and international customers, represents the company's largest incremental growth opportunity. Cambridge, Ontario Manufacturing Capacity Expansion. The planned 50% increase in large nuclear component manufacturing capacity, completing by mid-2026, directly targets management's stated goal of getting ahead of accelerating commercial nuclear demand. Growing $8.4 billion backlog. Backlog growth of roughly 40% year-over-year, following 50% growth in 2025, provides substantial multi-year revenue visibility across both the government and commercial segments. Selective, focused acquisitions. The July 2026 closing of the Precision Components Group acquisition, adding U.S.-based commercial nuclear component manufacturing capability, continues a pattern of targeted M&A that adds service density and adjacent capabilities rather than unrelated diversification. Strategic focus following medical business divestiture. The planned sale of the medical radioisotope business is intended to sharpen management's focus and capital allocation toward the two highest priority, highest growth areas: nuclear national security and commercial nuclear power. Potential AUKUS-related naval nuclear demand. Longer term, the trilateral Australia-UK-US defense partnership could create additional naval nuclear industrial opportunities for BWXT, though independent analysis notes that work share and timing remain uncertain and heavily policy-dependent. Section 13. Key risks. Project concentration on fixed-schedule programs. BWXT's own historical disclosures note that, at any given time, a relatively small number of projects can represent a significant part of our operations, meaning schedule delays, cost overruns, or technical problems on any single major naval or commercial program could disproportionately affect results. Government operations growth deceleration. The larger government operations segment grew just 2% year-over-year in Q2 2026, a reminder that the defense core is a stable but slow-growing base. If commercial operations growth were to decelerate as well, overall company growth could slow meaningfully. Federal budget and defense funding uncertainty. As a company heavily dependent on U.S. government defense spending for roughly 2/3 of revenue, BWXT remains exposed to federal budget uncertainty, appropriations delays, or shifting defense spending priorities, even though independent reporting has noted the company characterized recent quarters as strong despite uncertainty over federal defense funding. Gap between backlog and qualification and firm SMR orders. Much of BWXT's SMR-related growth narrative currently rests on supply chain qualification and positioning, such as the GE Vernova BWRX 300 relationship, rather than fully firm, contracted production orders. Delays in SMR projects like TVA's Clinch River site converting from planning to construction would directly slow this growth driver. Skilled labor and supplier bottlenecks. Independent analysis has flagged skilled labor availability and supplier bottlenecks as constraints on BWXT's ability to execute its growing backlog and capacity expansion plans on schedule. Elevated market expectations. Shares fell in after-hours trading immediately following the Q2 2026 beat and raise earnings print on a modest revenue miss against consensus, a sign that the market's expectations bar for BWXT has become demanding after a period of strong stock and business performance, leaving less room for even minor execution shortfalls. Integration risk on recent acquisitions. The Precision Components Group acquisition closed July 1, 2026, along with two 2025 acquisitions that contributed to backlog growth, carry typical integration execution risk common to any active M&A strategy.
Section 14. Valuation. Recent share price, $168 to $174. Regular session close, $173.79. After hours, $168.18 following Q2 print. FY 2026 non-GAAP EPS guidance, $4.70 to $4.80. Implied forward PE using guidance midpoint, 36x. Quarterly dividend, 27 cents per share. 5-year annualized revenue growth, historical, 10.7%. 2-year annualized revenue growth, recent, accelerating, 16.2%. Sell-side revenue growth expectation next 12 months, 13.4%, a modest deceleration versus the recent 2-year trend. Metric, value. BWXT trades at a meaningful premium to the broader industrial sector, reflecting its unique competitive positioning, accelerating commercial nuclear growth, and consistent history of earnings beats, including a 21.7% surprise in the quarter prior to this report. At roughly 36 times forward non-GAAP earnings, using current FY 2026 guidance, the stock is not inexpensive. But independent analysis frames this premium as reasonable, given BWXT's combination of essentially uncontested defense nuclear positioning and genuine accelerating commercial growth that most diversified industrial peers cannot match. The modest after-hour share price decline following the Q2 2026 beat and raise print, driven by a revenue figure landing just below consensus, illustrates that the market's bar for BWXT has become demanding, with investors parsing quarterly results closely for confirmation that the commercial growth acceleration is durable.
Section 15. Upcoming catalysts. Catalyst. Expected timing. Why it matters. Q3 2026 earnings report. Information not publicly available, typically late October, early November. Will show whether commercial operations growth remains at or near the 72% pace seen in Q2 2026 and whether raised full-year guidance is tracking on schedule. Firm SMR order announcements. Coming months per CEO commentary. Would mark the critical transition from SMR supply chain qualification and positioning to actual contracted revenue production. Cambridge, Ontario facility expansion completion. Mid-2026. Adds 50% more large nuclear component manufacturing capacity, directly supporting future revenue capacity. Completion of medical business divestiture. Information not publicly available, timing not specified in sources reviewed. Would formally complete the company's strategic refocusing toward nuclear security and power. TVA Clinch River BWRX 300 project milestones. Ongoing. A closely watched bellwether for the broader U.S. SMR construction pipeline, BWXT is positioned to supply. Further AUKUS-related policy and industrial announcements. Ongoing. Could reveal the scale and timing of potential additional naval nuclear industrial opportunities. Section 16. Long-term outlook. BWXT's long-term outlook benefits from a genuinely unusual dual foundation, an essentially uncontested, multi-decade defense nuclear franchise providing stable downside protection, combined with meaningful upside optionality from the broader global nuclear power resurgence and the emerging SMR industry. If the current pace of SMR project development continues, converting supply chain qualifications and positioning into firm, large-scale production orders, BWXT's commercial operations segment could continue growing well above the company's historical blended rate, pulling overall growth higher over a multi-year horizon. The key long-term swing factors are the pace of SMR commercialization, which depends on factors partly outside BWXT's own control, including individual developers' own execution and financing, continued federal defense budget support for naval nuclear programs, and BWXT's own ability to execute its capacity expansion and recent acquisitions without cost overruns or schedule delays. Given the company's demonstrated track record of consistent earnings beats and disciplined adjacent capability-focused M&A, independent analysis has generally characterized BWXT as one of the more durable, diversified ways to gain exposure to the broader nuclear power investment theme relative to single-technology pure-play SMR developers.
Section 17. Bull Case. Bull Case Summary. Commercial operations growth remains at or near its current 72% year-over-year pace as SMR supply chain qualifications convert into firm orders over the coming months, led by the TVA-backed Clinch River BWRX 300 project and additional international demand. The Cambridge, Ontario capacity expansion completes on schedule and immediately fills with new commercial work. The Precision Components Group acquisition integrates smoothly, adding incremental U.S. manufacturing capability. Government operations growth re-accelerates as naval, submarine, and carrier production ramps further, and the market rewards BWXT's increasingly diversified dual defense and commercial growth profile with continued multiple expansion. In this scenario, BWXT could sustain mid-teens or better overall growth for several years, supported by its now $8.4 billion and growing backlog. Section 18. Bear Case. Bear Case Summary. SMR project development slows as individual developers face their own financing, regulatory, or technical delays, leaving BWXT's supply chain qualifications unconverted into firm orders for longer than expected. Skilled labor or supplier bottlenecks delay the Cambridge, Ontario capacity expansion or strain execution on the growing backlog. Federal budget uncertainty pressures government operations growth further below its already modest 2% pace. A schedule slip or cost overrun on a major concentrated naval or commercial project disproportionately affects results, given the company's own acknowledged project concentration risk. And the market, having already priced in continued flawless execution at a premium valuation, punishes any shortfall severely, as the after-hours reaction to the modest Q2 2026 revenue miss already demonstrated. In this scenario, BWXT shares could see multiple compression even if the underlying long-term nuclear power investment thesis remains intact.
Section 19. Final Investment Conclusion. BWX Technologies occupies a genuinely rare position in American industry. Sole domestic manufacturer of naval nuclear reactors, controller of the only large reactor manufacturing facility in North America, and an increasingly important supply chain partner for the emerging commercial small modular nuclear reactor industry. Q2 2026 results, reported the same day as this report, showed that this positioning is translating into real financial results: an 18% revenue increase, a 14% net income increase, and a fourth consecutive quarter of guidance raises across every key financial metric, backed by a growing $8.4 billion backlog. At the same time, investors should recognize that BWXT's growth story is increasingly a tale of two segments: a slow, steady, essentially uncontested defense franchise growing in the low single digits in a much smaller but rapidly scaling commercial nuclear business that must continue delivering 70% plus growth rates for the overall blended growth story to hold together. The modest after-hours stock decline following an otherwise strong beat and raise quarter is a reminder that the market's expectations for BWXT have become demanding, and that execution on converting SMR positioning into firm orders, completing the Cambridge capacity expansion on schedule, and successfully integrating recent acquisitions will all matter meaningfully to whether the current growth trajectory and valuation can be sustained. Bottom line: BWX Technologies offers investors a genuinely differentiated way to gain exposure to both the defense nuclear sector and the broader civilian nuclear power resurgence, anchored by a defense franchise with essentially no domestic competition and a commercial growth engine now demonstrating real acceleration, but at a valuation and market expectations bar that leave limited room for execution missteps on its inherently concentrated, fixed-schedule project portfolio. This report does not constitute a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold BWXT shares. Readers should review the company's complete SEC filings and consult a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decision.